The Feast of Corpus Christi, the feast of the body and blood of Christ. I don't know where my First Holy Communion certificate is. I have my mom's First Communion certificate. I have my dad's First Communion certificate. I have my Grandma and Grandpa Schreiner's First Communion certificates. I have my great-grandfather Louis Schreiner's First Communion certificate. But I don't know where my own First Communion certificate is. I'm sure my mom didn't misplace it. I'm sure it was me somewhere along the line. I know I made my First Holy Communion. I have a picture of me in my blue slacks and my blue tie and my blue checkered jacket that my brother Jack wore for his First Communion and my brother Denny wore for his First Communion. And there I am standing in front of St. Joe's Rectory, and my godmother, my cousin Teresa, is on one side, and my godfather, my Uncle Bob, is on the other side, and I'm holding my First Communion candle and my First Communion prayer book. I have the picture. I don't know where my certificate is. I remember the day clearly. Frida Smith and I, we were the shortest ones in the second grade class. So we led the whole procession into church, and we led the communion line up and kneeling at the communion rail with my hands folded just as straight as they could be. And I remember the server coming along with the paten underneath my chin. And I remember Monsignor Gobble placing the host on my tongue. And I don't know how in the world it happened, but honest to goodness, I had the most incredible experience of God's love for me in receiving my First Holy Communion. I don't know how the Son of God who died on a cross, on a hill outside of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. I don't know how that act and that love made its way through the centuries into my little second grade heart, but it did. And I didn't want that experience to end. I remember the nuns telling us we couldn't chew the host. We just had to let it on our tongue and let it dissolve. And I didn't even want it to dissolve. I wanted it to stay for forever, because I wanted that feeling of incredible mercy and love to last for forever. And I don't know if God heard my prayer, but every time I receive Holy Communion, I get that same overwhelming experience of God's incredible love for me. Doesn't matter how old I am or how young I am. Doesn't matter how strong I am or how feeble I am. Doesn't matter how broken I am or how successful I am. That same experience of God's incredible love comes to me every time I receive the Holy Eucharist. And so when Jesus said on the night before he died, this is the everlasting covenant, meaning this is the relationship that will go forever and ever and ever, he meant it, and my heart knows it, and your heart knows it. It's the thing our hearts most desire. That awareness of God's love for us in his Son Jesus, who comes to us personally in Holy Communion. Now, we've learned a thing or two in this last year and a half about spiritual communion. When our churches were closed down and our only opportunity to attend Mass was virtually and online, and we flashed that prayer up there that talked about our hearts longing for Christ and how that longing would be satisfied in a kind of spiritual communion for those of you who can only join us at home. Please do not minimize the everlasting covenant that God has with you and the opportunity for a spiritual communion, for your heart that longs for him and his heart that longs for you, and will not let anything stand in the way of his love reaching you personally in a spiritual communion that's real. When I was in Zimbabwe, we had 25 different communities, and they were stretched out over a 5-mile drive from one place to the next place. And we couldn't get to every place every Sunday. But every community gathered every Sunday, and they experienced spiritual communion because it was all they had. They didn't even have an opportunity to receive Eucharist from the Blessed Sacrament because they worshiped in abandoned schoolhouses. They worshiped under a tree. They worshiped in temporary buildings of stick and mud and thatch. There was no opportunity for a tabernacle even for them. And so they read the scriptures to each other, and they preached the gospel to each other. And they received spiritual communion, knowing that one or two other of the communities got to have Mass because the priest got to be there. They shared in that joy, and they shared in that longing. The church is growing there. The church is thriving there, and vocations are thriving there. So please, please, please do not minimize the benefits of spiritual communion. It's real. I had an overwhelming experience of God's incredible love through receiving the Eucharist, and I do every time I receive the Eucharist. But what's grown since I was in 2nd grade is the church's understanding that the body of Christ is not simply on the altar, but the body of Christ is truly, really gathered around the altar. That those who receive the body of Christ become the living body of Christ, the living body and blood of Christ that the world yearns for, that the world is hungry for. So we who come here and are fed here, it's important for us to understand that we become the very thing that our world so badly needs. The work of compassion and kindness and truth and justice rests with us. The work of the church is the living, breathing body of Christ. A week ago or so, you received a letter from me in the mail, and it was inviting everybody back to church without all the restrictions that were hindering us. And in that was a form, a welcome back form, a discipleship form, a reminder that all of us are called to be actively engaged in the work of the church, to be the very body of Christ that we come here longing for and we come here to receive. And those forms are at the ends of all the pews. And there are our pencils as well. And we ask you to please take time and fill one of those out. Look at all the different ways that you can be of service to the church, all the different ways that you can reconnect and re-engage in the life of our church. The business of reconnecting and re-engaging is vital for us as a parish. We say in the Eucharistic prayer, a prayer of thanksgiving for we who have been called here in this place to minister to Christ. Listen to it in the Eucharistic prayer, where we give thanks to God for our being here to minister to Him. How is it that you, in your life, minister to Him and to His church? These forms will be in the pews for all of June. We're going to spend the whole month of June in an effort to reinvigorate and to recommit ourselves to the church and the work of the church. This is the place where we experience God's incredible love, and the place where we become God's incredible love.